Hey guys, what's going on? This is Andrew here today, and I figured that now would be a good time to continue the series that I like to call My Take on Gaming. Today, we're going to be focusing on the Sonic franchise. I've been really into the Sonic franchise ever since I got into video games. Believe it or not, I played a Sonic game before I ever played anything Mario related, when usually it's the other way around. Sonic the Hedgehog for the GBA was the first video game that I ever owned to myself, and Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 were the first two games that I got that weren't basic simple games like Pokemon or Lego games. The series started out as something that would give Sega a mascot, and it was basically meant to compete with the Mario series, as well as show off what the Genesis was able to do in terms of speed versus what was happening with the competition. So, blast processing, which is what they were advertising. The thing is, I liked the first game, but I feel like it was way too hard to be looked at as the go-to game for the console. It took me over a decade of playing the game to actually complete it for the first time, and I don't know anyone else personally that has done it. I believe that the concept was definitely a great one, but I and many others believe that the next entry in the franchise, Sonic 2, was the definitive version. In my opinion, the game had the definitive level design, as well as it being quite a bit easier than the last entry. To this day, this is probably my favorite 2D Sonic game of all time. Next up, we had a very interesting entry for the Sega CD, and that was Sonic CD. I don't always count this game as part of the Genesis collection because it is an exclusive add-on, but it still is a classic Sonic game, so I have to talk about it. This is one of the ones I haven't played all the way through yet, and that is because I tend to get lost in a ton of the levels. The game had a very futuristic feel to it, and there was a ton of teleporting going on, so a lot of the time I would lose my spot. I'm not saying that it's a bad game, hell it's far from that, but I do believe that they went a bit overboard on the level design for this one. One thing I will say is that I wish that we saw a 32X classic Sonic game as well, because we probably would have gotten a little bit more out of that with the extra power. Lastly, we had another great entry come up, and that was Sonic 3. Although this wasn't my favorite Sonic game, I feel like this was the best one for the casual player since it allowed you to save your game whenever you completed a world. This meant that you didn't have to start the game all over again when you ran out of lives, so you just picked up from the first level of the world where you left off. However, this was only the first part of the game released, as Sonic 3 and Knuckles was meant to be what you got after you completed Sonic 3 to have the full Sonic 3 experience. I didn't really understand 100% why they did this. I mean, it's cool that they expanded on the game, but I feel like they definitely could have fit it all onto one cartridge rather than release it as two separate games. You'll also have to realize that DLC wasn't a thing back then, so the general consumer wasn't used to buying two games to basically have it as one. Regardless, both games had amazing level design. Overall, I really enjoyed the classic Sonic franchise, and it's awesome to see what the community still puts together, including Mania, which I'm going to be talking about later. As time went by, things got a bit weird for the franchise and even Sega in general. With all these add-ons to the Genesis, especially the 32X being what Sega called a next-gen console at this point, it made people lose a bit of trust in the company when the Saturn came around. On top of that, we didn't get any new Sonic games outside of Sonic R, which was simply just a racing game, Sonic Jam, which was a compilation of the 2D Genesis games with enhancements and difficulty options, and Sonic 3D Blast, which was already on the Sega Genesis, a game which I enjoyed by the way. It wasn't until the Dreamcast came out that we saw another big Sonic game, and that was Sonic Adventure. This game was absolutely mind-blowing for its time, but it's obvious now that there were many issues with the game, including horrendous dialogue, various glitches throughout, and just a ton of problems with the game. Regardless of how it's aged, I feel like it was still a very well put together game. I always enjoyed the open world aspect quite a bit, and the level design seems to still hold up pretty well. My favorite thing about this game has to be the different perspectives of each character that you played as, especially Sonic and Tails. Although I definitely could have lived without the Knuckles and Big levels, they still were interesting if you were that kind of player. But what came next had to be my favorite 3D Sonic game of all time, and that was Sonic Adventure 2. The best thing about that game had to be the Sonic and Shadow levels, no doubt, and the Tails and Eggman levels were a great feature as well. One thing that absolutely sucked though were the Rouge and Knuckles levels. The areas seemed to be too big for exploration, and it sucked a lot of fun out of the game itself. Ironically, the area that I spent most of my childhood in had to be Chow Garden, a mode that I still actually play frequently to this day. Possibly, my favorite thing about the game itself had to be the soundtrack. Seriously, the game's soundtrack has to be among the top 10 best of all time, if you ask me. When comparing the game to Sonic Adventure 1 though, there was one thing that I enjoyed more about the first one, and that was the open world aspect. I feel like if Sonic Adventure 2 had that feel, it would feel so much more of a replayable experience. I feel like after the game was over for Sonic Adventure 2, there really wasn't much to do afterwards. So in that regard, I liked Adventure 2 more, but I feel like Sonic Adventure 1 had better replay value, if that makes sense. Just a year later, the Dreamcast was discontinued, and we never saw a Sonic game come to the Sega platform ever again, and Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 were ported over to the GameCube over time, as well as some games now coming to GBA for an expansion on 2D Sonic games, as well as some of the classic ones from the Genesis. Next up, we had our first multi-platform Sonic game, Sonic Heroes. In terms of how this game played, I believe that this was possibly the most well-made Sonic game, as there were very minimal bugs and gameplay that hasn't aged badly at all. I still feel like Sega should have brought this to the Dreamcast just for the owners that still had the thing, but it's clear that it probably wouldn't have sold too well anyway, so I see why they chose to release it elsewhere. The gameplay itself followed a similar concept to the last 3D games, but this time we saw 3 characters playable in each of the selections you can choose from, and you switch between them based off of the environment of the area you were in the level. For example, you would switch to Knuckles for smashing things, Sonic for speed and dashing, and Tails for flying to high areas. I never really paid attention to the story, but I definitely had a ton of fun playing the game as a kid regardless of never actually finishing the game. On top of that, the soundtrack was pretty cool as well. Now what comes next is probably the last decent Sonic game that we got, or perhaps what led to the downfall of the franchise, Shadow the Hedgehog. This one was a very interesting title with very mixed perception, but it was generally disappointing to a lot of fans. I personally wasn't affected negatively by it because I was still young when the game launched and I didn't really look into games for their problems. In my opinion, I thought it was cool to give a perspective on Shadow. He always interested me in Adventure 2, and they didn't explore his character much more up until this point, so it's always cool to me to look back at the game. Many people didn't like that there were vehicles and weapons instead of dash attacks you would normally see, but I feel like those additions made the game pretty unique. Like I said, after this game, things started to take a turn for the worse for the franchise. At this point, we got Sonic 06, which really wasn't the worst game outside of the glitches, but it was clear that Sega didn't care to iron out the issues since they thought that they can just sell the game with the Sonic name, kind of like what Nintendo does nowadays with some of their games, unfortunately. Anyway, the game was a complete mess, and it wasn't the only one that we had coming. At this point, Sega just started milking the Sonic franchise even more and released so many different games in the 3D series that were so much different than the other entries, and they really just weren't good games at all. As much as a major Sonic fan that I am, I didn't care at all for most of the games outside of Sonic Colors, but even then that game was mediocre at best. Eventually, I did come around to loving Sonic Generations, but that was just a remaster of all the past 3D and 2D levels baked into one game. And then right after that, we got Sonic Lost World, another piece of garbage game. After this, the Sonic series took a very needed break, and we saw mainly mobile variants of the games coming around, which I really didn't pay attention to. One thing to mention, though, around the same time as these garbage console releases, we got 2 of my favorite handheld Sonic games, Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure. Those 2 games were a 2D, 3D hybrid, depending on the stages. I feel like they took great advantage of the DS better than most of the other games that Nintendo released at the time. Finally, the fans got something that we wanted, and that was Sonic Mania, a fan-made Sonic game that Sega bought the rights to and sold at a reasonable price tag. The game was an absolute masterpiece. I mean, literally anything that you would want in a 2D Sonic game was in there, and that even included some new concepts as well, and even some ideas that were taken from the other 3D games in the series. With a game like this out, it gave me so much hope for another 3D Sonic game, since I thought that Sega finally came to their senses. Unfortunately, I was extremely disappointed. Sonic Forces has to be the worst Sonic game that I've ever played in my life, and I have so many reasons behind it. The level design was boring as shit. It basically felt like I was playing Subway Surfers since I was just jumping over obstacles. The soundtrack was meh, and the game was just way too short. I'm not even kidding. I got the game on Christmas Eve, the year it came out, played it a little bit before I went to sleep, and then finished the game Christmas morning before my family even opened presents. It was just a rush mobile game that should have never been a thing, which brings me to my final verdict on the franchise. I feel like it started off really interesting in both the 2D and 3D variants, but we never really saw any great innovation over the years to expand on what we had before. It took a fan to improve on the 2D concept, and I feel like that's exactly what we need if we ever want to see any improvements on the 3D Sonic games. I feel like Sega has completely lost touch with the general fan base on what we want, and it's causing the company to lose a lot of credibility. To this day, I feel like Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are still the definitive 3D experiences, and that sucks because those games came out before I was even born, which means that I haven't seen any major improvement on the game in my lifetime. On top of that, we're going to be getting a Sonic Colors remaster, which no one at all asked for. If Sega wants to make another 3D Sonic game, it's got to be Sonic Adventure 3, because whatever else they're doing is just simply not working, and they really got to pay attention to those reviews, because lately, these games have just been sucking. Anyway, guys, that's my long take on the Sonic franchise. Like I've said many times over, these are my opinions, which means that I won't have the same opinions as others. I really want to see the game eventually get that good game again, but if things keep going down the way that they are, I won't mind if the franchise finally has its conclusion. Thank you all for watching this video. I will see you all in the next one.